We're going to move on now to our very last question for tonight, which is main character mental sex, soon to be called main character problem-solving technique. Currently, as mental sex, it's male or female. As problem-solving technique, it's linear or holistic. What we're going to do is show you some video clips right off the bat here, and these video clips will illustrate these two different kinds of characters, and then we're going to talk a little bit about them, and at that point we'll announce the winner of the contest and tell you what's coming up next week. Okay, so first of all, we're going to look at the X-Files with Scully and Mulder. The thing is, this is interesting because, in fact, the male FBI agent, Mulder, has the female mental sex. Scully, who's the female FBI agent, has the male mental sex. When they're just a believer and an unbeliever, the chemistry is actually lost, you'll find, very often. But when he's the one who deals with things intuitively and holistically and tries to arrive at understandings by pulling all the little feelings he has together, and she's the one who tries to look at things step by step. If I don't see the connection logistically from one point to the next, that I won't buy it, then the chemistry works. Now we've seen that she is asking for, give me this linear proof, step by step. Show me how this connects to that. Give me a theory. She doesn't even believe what he's saying is a theory. He's just saying, well, this is known, and this is known, and this piece is known, and that piece is known. That's where the chemistry comes from. So just because it says male and female mental sex has nothing to do with physical gender in Dramatica. And soon, once version 4 comes out, it won't even refer to male and female mental sex unless you go to use the original terminology. I'm sorry. Getting a little sidetracked here. Okay, now the next video clip that we're going to look at is from, where are we? There we are, Hunt from Red October. Okay, why do we use Hunt from Red October? Well, look at Alec Baldwin's part, Alec Baldwin's part in Hunt from Red October. Here he plays a very masculine character, and he's definitely male, but he's female mental sex. Why is he female mental sex? Because he uses his intuition before he approaches his logic. In the scene we're going to look at, we have him surrounded by all of the generals and admirals and Pentagon chiefs of staff in the room with the presidential advisor. And they're all sitting there trying to determine what to do about Ramius, who is ostensibly going to take the ship that he has stolen, the Soviet submarine, and maybe launch an attack on the United States. But Alec Baldwin's character, Jack Ryan, comes up with this intuitive decision and then has to explain himself logistically when he doesn't even know logically why he came up with it to begin with. So let's take a look at that clip now, and we'll see exactly why he uses female problem-solving techniques. Clearly, here is a character who didn't even know why he said, you know, son of a bitch, and put his hand down. It just came to him in an inspiration because he was just passing over his mind all the experiences and impressions and feelings he'd had about Ramius, and it just occurred to him, it popped up like, oh my God, he's trying to defect. Then when they said, what makes you come to this conclusion? He's got to say, well, let me see, what did make me come to that conclusion? And start trying to come up with reasons that are enough to satisfy them when it wasn't reason that he used. Reason and emotion are two different kinds of intelligence. There's emotional intelligence and there's reasonable intelligence. Each one uses a different kind of logic. There is reason logic and emotion logic, okay? Now, female mental sex uses emotion logic primarily. Male mental sex uses the reason logic. Now, why do we say that it's male and female? Why isn't it linear and holistic? Okay, here's something for you psychology people. Occasionally when I put in a little psychology into these classes, then I get feedback from people who write me and say, you know, that's the part I like the best. And other people write back and say, that's the part I hated the most, because let's stick to story. Well, if you don't want to stick around and find out who won, I'll send you email if you won. But if you don't want to hear psychology because you're just a storyteller after all and it doesn't matter how the human mind works, go away now or plug your ears or something. But if you want to hear some psychology, here it is. The human mind starts out with neither a bias towards the neurology or the biochemistry. The neurology is where all of the binary decisions are made. The biochemistry is where all of the analog decisions are made. If the brain was just one big neurology stuck into one big biochemical soup, Well, not much would happen. But the brain is made up of a bunch of little tiny neural networks called ganglia. And each ganglion has maybe, 4,000 on up neurons in it, tightly packed with its own little microclimate zone of biochemicals. Now, in the 12th to 14th week of pregnancy, a developing fetus will either get a flush of testosterone or not during that time. If it does, then that testosterone has the well-known effect in the body to increase the amount of serotonin. Serotonin is a neurological exciter. And as a result of being an exciter, it sort of amplifies the effect of the neurology compared to the biochemistry. It makes it fire more easily, more often. So the neurology becomes much more active compared to the biochemistry. If there is no flush of testosterone, then it remains down and natural estrogen in the system produces dopamine, which is an inhibitor for the firing of the neurology. It doesn't add more dopamine. There's no flush of estrogen if there isn't a flush of testosterone. It's just there is no testosterone. So when the neurology is quieter, then the background biochemicals like shadows, when you turn a bright light off in front of your face, can come through, and they hold their own elegant information. That's analog information, where the emotions come from. Our time sense, our sense of the flow and ebb and patterns moving and undulating, anticipation, desires, that all comes from that biochemical side. Now, on the neurology side, we get our ones and our zeros. We get, yes, it's this, not that. We get networks. Here's what happens according to Dramatica theory. Dramatica theory is about the story mind, and it predicts that we need to know whether the story mind is male or female in order to be able to complete the structure of the story. What is a male mind? Well, in that 12th to 14th week of pregnancy, when there is the flush of testosterone and it creates the serotonin that excites the neurology, after the 12th to 14th week, it would just go away. Except for the fact that it's our belief that inside the ganglia, there are these little cells they know about called L cells and R cells. And it's our belief that the L cells or R cells, one of them, is a permanent creator of a baseline level of serotonin or other exciters within each ganglion. And that the other cell produces a certain level of dopamine. So it's our belief that during that 12th to 14th week, there's this steady wash of hormones. If it's there, then it will cause these L and R cells to lock in place with a certain ratio of which one's more active compared to the other. And at the level of the ganglia, that will be where it's determined if the neurology is more sensitive or if the biochemistry is more sensitive, which one has more sway. When you have the wash go away, it sets in place. And even though the overall biochemistry of the brain could be identical for men and women, at the level of each separate ganglion, there will be this built-in bias, like if you know electronics, it's a DC bias. It raises the whole level or lowers the whole level, so that it's going to emphasize the logistic reasonability or the logistic emotionability. So you're either going to be more towards the intuitive holistic or more towards the logistic. Now, there's another class that I teach on this mental sex area because it's a favorite area of mine. And in that class we talk about evolutionary-wise why it was not only necessary but it was unavoidable that two mental sexes, one favoring an appreciation of linearity in space and the other favoring an appreciation of holisticness in time, that these two should be created, each one seeing farther into one side than the other at the expense of looking in the other's direction. So one sees more into space at the expense of time, the other sees more into time at the expense of space. When they form a bonded pair and pair up, that's when they overlap and work together and can see farther between the two of them into space and time than any one organism could see by itself. Now, of course, that puts it in a position where at the beginning, when young children are born, young creatures are born, generally they are right in the middle pretty much with just a slight bias, that slight underlying bias to one side or the other. But at the same time that you reach puberty in humans and you get that hormone wash at puberty, then it adds to that bias, shoves you over to whichever side you're on one way or the other very strongly, and at that point moves you just as far as you can go without losing your overlap with the opposite sex, because you need that overlap for communication. And the other thing it does is that it makes sure that you have secondary sexual characteristics, so rather than going off on your own, you're drawn to the other side even though you can't communicate with them as fully. Now, again, that talk on mental sex, we've done that, Chris and I, sometimes in front of a whole group of people live. We also have a tape of it that's available. If you want to look at the tape of it, go to storymind.com, and at that point, move down to the very bottom of any page, and you'll see a place to click on the Mental Relativity website, which is the psychology behind Dramatica. Then you'll be able to read all these articles about mental sex and see everything about the evolutionary and biological aspects of it. But it's those kinds of things that grew out of the model of the story mind, those kinds of things that allowed us to program the relationships that created the patented story engine. Every writer doesn't need to know this, but believe me, the writers who want to really get into the minds of their characters, the more you learn about how the actual mind works on these mental relativity pages, the more you're going to be able to bring that knowledge into an intuitive explanation to your audience of why this character is doing one thing or another and how they work together. So, that tonight then gives us our complete exploration of the first 4 of the 8 essential questions: main character resolve, main character direction or growth, main character approach, main character mental sex. Next week we're going to look at the plot dynamics, the other 4 essential questions, which are the story's driver, action or decision, the story limit, time lock or option lock, the story outcome, success or failure, and the story's judgment, good or bad. So tune in next week at the same Dramatica time, same Dramatica channel.